Yeah. So, warm welcome to everyone. And we have today Dr. Jyoti Nair presenting her research. She is a researcher who is interested in how livelihoods of rural communities are shaped by socioeconomic and environmental changes, particularly in the face of resource constraints, social structural dynamics, and policy shifts. She has completed her PhD at the Academy of Conservation Science and Sustainability Studies at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment. Before that, she has worked briefly where she was involved in research and action projects related to climate change, vulnerability and adaptation, and water security. Her current research examines how different institutional arrangements, power dynamics, grassroots initiatives, and lack of collective action are influencing water governance, particularly in the context of sustainable food systems. Currently, Dr. Nair is a postdoctoral fellow, and thank you so much, Dr. Nair, for giving this talk. And over to you.
Yeah. I'll first share my screen and then we can proceed. Um, so the slideshow is visible now, right?
Yeah. So
Hmm.
you've just started sharing your screen. It's taking some
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, so I maybe just begin by the time it is getting loaded by saying like thank you, thanking the Bihun Collective for this opportunity of and for organizing such a seminar series for early career researchers because it gives us this opportunity to present our work and get feedback on something that is new for us also as an like in our career trajectories. So thanks for that, and thanks for the audience that is present here today for taking out time and your interest to be to listen to this stuff. What I am going to present here is part of my PhD thesis, where I looked at the interconnections or interconnectedness between agrarian change, that is changing social relations and ways and means of production, and also environmental change, how these interact, taking specifically the case of water stress in the Cauvery Delta region, how these affect or how these influence livelihood diversification and are influenced by diversification in the larger sense, and overall what impact it has on the well-being of the household at the household level. Yeah. So also so some of the insights on irrigation and water management that I'm going to present here are also from the current project that I am part of, where I have continued to engage in the same landscape. Yeah. So broadly, the outline of the presentation today would be that after giving a background to the study, I'll move on to the how I situated the analysis, the conceptual framework, which would then lead to how the study was done, describing the study sites and also the methods. Then I'll present the research findings and the insights from the field and conclude with some discussions and remarks. So it has been widely discussed that even when agriculture sector continues to support a large share of rural population, sole dependence on agriculture is no longer viable, especially for the smallholders. And it is said to be so because there is this interaction between changing social, economic, and environmental processes and conditions, and then there are policies and relations, social relations that have together brought together resulted into a sort of a situation where the agricultural sector is in distress. And now these pressures that are there on the agrarian households are not just driven by the structural factors, but these are also reshaping the agrarian relations and ways and means of production. So, in this given context, the push for diversification is much more than what it was before. And also, one must note here that the experience of distress is uneven among the social groups, and so are the responses and the outcomes that come out of it. In this study, I have focused on particularly the case of water stress and how it interacts with these different processes that I mentioned earlier, and which are often beyond the local scale, and how these then shape the livelihood decisions at the household level. So, water stress is not just limited to the lack of physical availability of water, but there is this climate, technology, policy, and power relations that are mediating the supply, distribution, and access to the adequate amount of irrigation, water for irrigation, and whether the farmers are able to access it or not. So, water stress in India is a critical and a multidimensional challenge, and the drivers of water stress have been varied. So, it ranges from the intensive cultivation practices that were introduced or promoted during the Green Revolution period to groundwater over extraction, which is a consequence of those intensive cultivation practices. And India now stands as one of the largest groundwater users globally. And then there are these cropping practices where water intensive crops are being supported or incentivized. Policy incentives are there and they are being promoted in unsuitable areas. And of course, there is what climate variability and change that has affected the availability of water. So if we look at the trajectory of irrigation development, which corresponds with the agricultural development in India, we can see that it was during the Green Revolution, introduction of Green Revolution technologies, that there was this emphasis on irrigation development, and it established the importance of irrigation as an important input among the other inputs that are there. And initially, there was this emphasis on expansion of surface water supply to be able to intensify agriculture. And slowly, there was conjunctive use of surface and groundwater to be able to manage the water demand that has come out because of intensive agriculture. But by 1980s and 90s, the expansion of groundwater was massive, and at the same time, there was also a decline in the public investment on the surface water irrigation, which increased the emphasis on private investments for groundwater to access groundwater. And to the present time, where the extent of groundwater irrigation is so much that about 70% of the irrigated area in India is underground water, is uses groundwater for irrigation. But then the question that has come up that we need to ask is that who can access it and who benefits from it. So this is where diversification reflects both as an opportunity and also as a necessity, because it then provides an opportunity to reduce the risks by providing maybe capital to drill bore wells, or that additional amount of money that is required to access groundwater by purchasing groundwater from the nearby borewell. At the same time, it also highlights the growing inequalities that are there in the ability to access the livelihood resources that are there, that is land, water, and capital. So in this talk today, what my aim is to examine how or present how there is this interaction, this triadic interaction between changing social relations and ways and means of production with environmental change, taking the case of water stress, and how it interacts with the livelihood decisions that are taken at the household level. Now, to explore these processes, we did this study in the Cauvery Delta region in Tamil Nadu, which is one of the largest paddy producing regions in India. According to the statistics in 2018, 65% of the gross sown area was under paddy in the region. And even when it is the largest rice producing area and it has been supported by extensive network of canals for more than 2000 years and has been producing paddy, the region is facing a looming crisis, both of agrarian distress and also water crisis. And this has been due to repeated failure of the southwest monsoons, upstream use, and the conflict between the two riparian states on the allocation and distribution of water that has impacted the flow of water into the delta. So in the region, the canal system is fed by River Cauvery during the southwest monsoon period, and also locally through the northeast monsoons. Broadly, this is the cropping pattern in the region where in a given plot, the farmer would grow two short to medium paddy varieties, that is during Kuruvai and Taladi, or grow a longer duration paddy variety during Samba season. And after the harvest of paddy, pulses are grown. And pulses are known to be nitrogen fixating plants. They are also grow not they do not just act as cash crop or add to the nutrient in the diet of the household, but also help in rejuvenating the land. So it is one of the ways in which the farmer then helps the soil to helps to improve the soil quality. And the remaining days before the next cropping cycle, the land is left fallow during the summer season. And we can now look at the conceptual framework that was used for the study. In development studies, while looking at livelihood at the household livelihood strategies, most of the studies have used the framework that was proposed by Schoons in 1998, where they look at how different livelihood resources, which are termed as capitals, that is natural, social, physical, financial, and human. So, how these capitals are combined in a given point of time, under a given context or an institutional context, and what livelihood strategies can these lead to at the household level. So, livelihood strategies meaning it can be diversification, migration, or just to maintain the general well being of the household. But in operationalizing the livelihood, this framework or this approach to understand the household livelihoods, the most of the studies they have missed to look at why certain livelihoods are possible and others are not. So for this, Natarajan et al., based on the critiques of these different livelihood studies that have come around in the past few decades, have proposed a revised version of this framework where they say that, so they propose three critiques to the original framework, saying that first, the relational approach has to be taken into consideration because different households have different capacities and abilities, uh, and their experience of the distress is uneven. So, uh, and that also corresponds to the responses that they are able to make or they are able to take. So the relational approach in how they are able to undertake or utilize different livelihood resources has to be taken into consideration. Second, they say that uh, the original livelihood framework uses just environment or the natural capital as a resource which is required to build the livelihood strategies. But in the current context, in the contemporary times, there is global environmental change. The availability of the resources are limited. It is becoming more uncertain, and it is becoming more costlier to it is becoming costlier to appropriate a certain resource, and there is this and so that all those factors have to be taken into consideration while looking at the livelihoods and how these livelihoods are changing. And thirdly, they say that the original framework looks at the livelihoods, the combination of these capitals at a given point in time. But a household in its lifetime moves between different livelihood activities. So the livelihood, instead of looking at livelihoods as livelihood strategies, one must look at the pathway or the trajectory that the household is taking. So livelihoods should, because livelihoods adapt, change, progress, and evolve with time. So livelihood should be considered to be in flux. So, to understand this, how the livelihoods are continuously reworked, transformed over time, Dorbet et al.'s framework provides a useful way to look at this fluidity in the livelihoods of the household. They have, so based on the aspirations and capabilities of the households, they have categorized the different livelihood activities that the household undertakes into hanging in, stepping up, and stepping out. So hanging in households are usually those which are more marginalized and they struggle to maintain a certain level of well-being and usually face adverse socio-economic conditions, or they may be part. So the type of non-farm activity, for example, in a village setting that they may be able to take up is low-paying or low-productive uh, activity. Then there are stepping up households which are then investing to expand their current activities to increase production and income. And there are stepping out households in this category where they have already accumulated certain amount of assets, which helps them to diversify to activities which can give them higher income. Now, this approach then recognizes that households with different aspirations and capabilities are moving between different livelihood activities and in turn reducing their vulnerability to the different stressors that are there. And also they are able to increase or maybe to some extent for some households there is deprivation in terms of production and income that they are able to achieve. Some are able to accumulate and invest for future. And by doing so, they are moving up or down the socioeconomic ladder. So then helps us to visualize the linkages that are there between the livelihood patterns of different social groups in terms of the emerging social differentiation and change in class position. And this can be then further extended to see from the environmental lens how it affects the use of the resource. For example, in this case, water, how the resource is being used, accessed, and distributed in the village setting, in the agrarian setting, and the long-term sustainability of the resource. Now we'll turn to how this study was conducted. So after scoping visit of close to 25 villages across the delta, we selected three villages in the central part of the delta that is called the Vennar subbasin and the Old Delta. And this selection was then based on their dependence on agriculture, the level of diversification that the respondents presented to us, the different sources of irrigation. So here I have focused on canal and groundwater and their experience of water stress over time. So I conducted a household and plot level survey where a list of farming households was prepared in each village, with the help of key informants. Um, And for all practical purposes, it was a list of all the farming households in the village. But a few farmers or few respondents were not available or not willing to participate. They were not participate. They were not included in the survey. Then there were a few focus group discussions that were done with men and women, agricultural laborers, small and medium farmers to understand the um, cropping cycle, the challenges that they face, their experience of water stress, labor relations, etc. And key informant interviews were done where the informants were selected uh, ba- using snowball sampling. And these included village elders, some political activists, government officials, and agents or like harvester agents, like machinery agents, etc. I also conducted a few participatory exercises, for example, village mapping, where so through this, I was able to understand the spatial structure of the village, the different hamlets, where each caste dominates, etc., and the type of housing structure, for example. And then I also did a seasonal calendar where, with the help of a few, we created this seasonal calendar with help of a few respondents, which helped us understand the local weather conditions, the migration pattern, the cropping cycle, labor requirement or labor demand, and the inflow of canal water, etc. The next set of slides I'll discuss the research findings and the insights from this field and the different processes and conditions that have helped me to understand the triadic interaction that I mentioned earlier. So we'll first begin with looking at the changes that have occurred in the region in terms of the social relations or agrarian relations. So there are three broad caste groups in the delta known as Brahmins, non-Brahmins, and Adi Dravidas, which form the three agrarian classes, that is landlords, tenants, and laborers. And the relationship has evolved from the pre-colonial time to the present, from a stringent relation between the mirasidar, who were the upper caste or elite class landowning landowners, who had adimais or slave-like laborers, agricultural laborers working for them, to the present form where there is casual labor, wage-based labor. Not just the laborers, but even the landowners have now diversified their livelihood activities. And all of this has happened with changes in the governing regime, social movements, peasant struggle, introduction of technology. So Cauvery Delta was one of the first few regions in the country where green revolution technologies, those modern agricultural technologies, were introduced. And then there were different policy reforms also that helped to bring about this change. Even there was, over time, there has been change in means of production from the traditional way of cultivating and like from sowing to harvest, how paddy was being cultivated, to the present form, where it is more mechanized, it is more input intensive, it is intensified, and in like how the landowners say, because of the use of machinery it is more efficient maybe, but for the laborers what they say is that the introduction of machinery has reduced the demand for their work and has forced them to diversify. And this introduction of technology has then altered the labor relations in the delta. So from the survey, what we noticed was that from the traditional in the traditional cropping cycle, where this in the summer months or in summer a few days or few weeks in summer, when the land was left fallow or it was prepared for the next cropping cycle, now more and more farmers are using groundwater to cultivate paddy, and some of them also cultivate cotton. And pulses, which was an important crop for the soil health, this the cultivation of that has reduced to a considerable extent, to a great extent. In 2017, and when the survey was done, in the three villages, most of the farmers said that they did not cultivate pulses. But later in my visits, I have seen that there is limited cultivation of pulses that is still available, still present, but it is not to that extent that it used to be earlier. So farmers then have to navigate between different environmental stressors to secure their crops. And there is a range of environmental stressors that they have presented to us. For example, reduction in number of rainy days, increased frequency of drought events, change in the onset of rainfall, unseasonal rainfall, and and this has been an observation across the farmer groups. For example, in the first quote, the farmer told us that there was not enough water to do transplantation of paddy seedlings because of low irrigation supply in the last 3 years. And when they did the transplantation this year, it could not grow further because of the water shortage. Now, Tamil Nadu almost every year also experiences a cyclonic activity. And in 2018, when the survey was being done, the cyclone Gaja hit the region, and it severely impacted the paddy crops, which were just ready to be harvested. So here in the second quote, the harvester agent. So there is a harvester or a machine that comes to the delta, and agents are farmers in themselves become agents which then facilitate the access to these harvesters. So one of the agent then told us that in this particular land, so last year if they were able to get around 5 bags of paddy, this year after Gaja cyclone there was this pest attack that reduced the yield to not even 3 bags, and because of that, and after all the expenses that the farmer has to undertake, the landowner will be left with nothing. The annual rainfall of the Tiruvarur district, where my study villages were located, this trend here shows that there have been many years with deficit rainfall, and which also correspond to the drought events like 2003, 4, 6, 7, and 13, 14. Then 16, 17 were drought years. So there are multiple events multiple drought events that are reducing the coping capacity of the farmers. So in the region also, this one important point is that the water that the region receives through the canal network is released from Mettur Dam, that receives and stores water from that is released from Karnataka, and this is only after it is only after that it reaches a certain level or a certain volume, that is 45,000 million cubic feet, that it is released into the delta. And according to the official statement, it has to be official agreement. The release is expected to happen on June 12th every year. And it is based on that date that the farmers have adjusted their cropping cycle. But in the from the 1970s, if we see the data, there has been considerable delay in the number of days um, from the expected date of release into the delta of water into the delta. And over the years from 1960s, there is also this total outflow into the delta has also reduced. And all of these factors have then pushed the farmers to increase the groundwater use. And from the survey, we saw that uh, the the share of groundwater in irrigation has increased considerably over time. So this has had a few consequences on the not just the availability or the access to groundwater, but also relations within the farming community. So in the village, the farmers used to, like, once or twice, once in 2 years at least, they would come together. It was like a collective action for them to contribute labor and or some funds, some money, so that at the village level, locally, the sub canals and the smaller channels could be repaired. So that is, they can be desilted, so that when the water is there in the major canals, it flows unhindered into the village and the farm plots. But with the private access to groundwater, individual well owners have dissociated themselves from this collective canal maintenance activity. Then the large and medium farmers established or drilled wells much earlier. So they were able to access the resource and have benefited from it. While the resource poor farmers who are trying to drill the wells now have to now drill deeper, and which is much more expensive compared to previously, because the water table has also gone down. The non-borewell owning farmers now have to purchase, so the non-borewell owning farmers purchase water at a minimum rate of at least 6,000 rupees per acre per cropping season, or it is at an hourly basis where they purchase it for 80 to 120 rupees for an hour. So it is an additional expense for the farmer, because originally when the canal supply was available and adequate, it was at a minimal cost, or at least, or close to, it was almost for free that the water was available to them. Now, even if it is a good rainfall year and there is good flow of water in the canals, the farmers pay upfront to the borewell owner, because they want to avoid risk in case there is, because of the uncertainty that is associated with the canal water supply. So this expansion of groundwater irrigation has had this consequence that the water table has gone down. So based on the survey data, what we saw was, over the years, the depth of water level cited when the well was constructed has gone deeper. And like I said before, it has also then increased the cost of drilling of bore wells. So apart from the indebtedness that is rising, diversification is also seen to be a major a coping response at the household level to the different stressors that environmental and the relational stressors that I mentioned earlier. So I'll just read out the case of one farmer who to demonstrate the different livelihood activities that the household has taken at the household level. So this is the story of Jay Kumar. He worked close to 15 days as a driver on contract basis at a government office. The household of 8 members totally owned close to 7 acres of farmland, fragmented into 9 plots. His mother, wife, and sister supported in farm operations, helping save a considerable amount of labor cost when compared to other landowners who relied on laborers entirely. Multiple episodes of drought in the last decade affected their paddy crop. In Samba season this year, he had to directly broadcast seeds twice, resulting in loss of money because the seedlings withered after the first sowing since canal water did not arrive on time. One of the first few comments that he made about farming as Valvadaram, that is the means of living or livelihood, was that once in a year income from farming was not enough. Yet, he also felt a sense of pride and belongingness in the village in caring for his land. For the most part, he himself is engaged in tending to his farm plots. He also works for additional wages for a neighboring landlord for application of chemical inputs. His sister recently moved to Chennai for better income to meet education expenses of her children. They want their young children to do well in school and get better paying jobs when they grow up. Jayakumar, like several other households in the village, believed he could not have supported his family and reached the present comfortable standard of living where he has been able to clear off the past debts if he had depended solely on the paddy farming. So just like him, we then what we saw in our sample was that across the different uh, landowning classes, there are different livelihood activities that they are able to take based on their capacities. So, within the landowning classes, that is marginal small farmers, medium, and large farmers, of course, the availability or access to the resources and how they are able to access their level of vulnerability varies, and it improves as we go to the higher landowning class. But within the livelihood categories also, the dependence on farming also varies from hanging in households are dependent more on farming compared to the stepping out households where the uh, livelihood activities of the households are more diversified, and they are also better, they are maybe also participating in more specialized and better productive activities, like better income generating activities. Then within these categories, like within the landowning classes and between the livelihood categories, what we also saw was that the educational status of the households also varied, and it improved as we went from hanging into stepping out. And in this, we saw that specifically in the medium farmers, which was a large chunk of our sample, we saw that there was this emphasis on education of children in government in English medium schools, even when there was free government medium schools that were located within the village, and it was because they wanted their children to be part of the job market, to be able to be eligible to get into the job market when they grow up. They didn't want their children to be part to continue their association with this risky enterprise of farming, but at the same time they also wanted their children, especially the sons, to have this agrarian roots, um, and continue their association with the land. Then yeah, so what we saw was that by taking different livelihood activities, uh, there are winners or losers in some way, that some farmers or some households are able to progress with time, but for some maybe the deprivation hits them harder, because so the experiences and the starting point of each household differs, and it keeps changing over time, and this influences their social interactions as they move up and down the socioeconomic ladder, and it also affects how they appropriate the resource, because as they diversify, they have more income or they have more capital, they may reinvest in the farm on the farm, they may drill bore wells. So for a hanging in household, maybe it may be adding to their debt, but for a stepping up or stepping out household, maybe it is a way for them to accumulate and diversify to a better paying or better income generating activity. So coming to the discussions now. So the findings of the study shows that access to livelihood resources, the different strategies that the households take, and also the livelihood outcomes are uneven and are differentiated along the social lines. And these are affected by a combined effect of the changing social relations, institutions, and also the biophysical environment. And we saw it through the case of water stress here in the region. The extent of livelihood vulnerability varies. Like I mentioned, for the hanging in households, drilling of borewells is an additional expense. It may put them into a continuous debt cycle, and maybe it will just pull them down further. While for stepping up and stepping out, it is an investment to accumulate further. And then we saw that there is this growing dependence on groundwater and expansion of groundwater for irrigation has created some sort of power asymmetries between borewell and non-borewell owners. It has also affected or influenced the village level institutions that were there for the maintenance of the surface water infrastructure locally. It has altered the farming practices where now paddy is being grown during summer season. Um, yeah. And so this has affected, so overall, what we see that there is this interaction between diversification and and that diversification is not just being influenced by the political economic factors and environmental change, but in some way it is also feeding back into these processes and conditions. So, in conclusion, what this study tried to present was that we need to move beyond the traditional sustainable livelihoods, the operationalization of the sustainable livelihoods framework, in looking at how different livelihood resources or livelihood capitals are being combined at a given point of time to generate a certain livelihood strategies. But look at livelihoods to be in flux and see why certain livelihoods are possible and others are not, and that there is a need to foreground the environmental dimension in this discussion, because in the contemporary time, it is not just influencing the livelihood decisions, but also these livelihood decisions are influencing the resource use, the pattern of resource use and distribution. Yeah, thank you. So I would like to acknowledge my doctoral advisory committee, Dr. Bijoy Thomas, who was my supervisor, and Dr. Chandrasekhar Bahinipati and Dr. Veena Srinivasan for their support. And also the current project where I'm working in the same landscape, which has helped widen my understanding on the irrigation and water management practices in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jyoti, for that insightful presentation. And before I kind of share my observations or any questions, there is one participant, Kalyani. Do you have anything to share? Any comments or observation?
No, I mean, Jyoti's supervisor, Dr. Bijoy Thomas, is also my supervisor. So basically, I'm learning many things from her. I keep bugging her about my research and my doctoral project. So, not many comments, but yeah, what she's saying in Cauvery Delta region has been same thing which is happening in Marathwada region where I work. So it's basically a drier region, but despite different geographical conditions, the other factors like environmental conditions or the social factors have remained the same, and which is leading to these issues between equity and sustainability. So yeah.
Okay. Um, Maybe Kalyani can also present in one of our early career researchers panel, maybe that we do in the next year. We plan to do it a little differently, but yes, please do share your research with us as well. So
Yeah.
yeah. So Jyoti, yeah. So there is a lot of similarity with my research as well, because my PhD was also on, it was also about understanding some of the livelihood strategies and practices. And it was in a tribal agrarian community that I did in Purulia,
Mhm.
in West Bengal, but it's like a neighboring district to the state of Jharkhand. And so I found a lot of similarities as well. And I have looked at it from the livelihood as a social practice framework, and also brought in Bourdieu's basically understanding of human capital. So, I mean, capital as such. And so yeah, so one thing, and also my area was a drought affected, and uh, there were frequent droughts. That was, and my research was about is that how the state and the community interface, basically how they encounter, and in this interface, how they kind of look at drought, how they perceive drought, how the community perceives drought. And hence I've looked at it using the social constructivist theoretical framework, and how the state operationalizes drought in terms of how and when drought has been declared and based on what parameters, irrespective of or in comparison to how the community have, kind of shared their narratives around their experiences of drought. That is something that I have seen in my research. So having those similarities or drawing those similarities from my research, there was something that I found with respect to the cropping patterns that you shared, was that it could be because this is a little hilly area. So there was an elevation, and hence there was differences in cropping pattern based on the different land structure, the elevation of the land. So there were different crops that were sown according to the different land types, which is not just by elevation but also about the with respect to the soil type. So so the nature of drought was very different to the land structure as well. You understand?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so somebody who is just dependent on paddy, their idea of drought was very different to somebody who has a upland and was
Mm,
doing a multi-crop and not
mm,
just doing paddy.
mm.
So there was a difference in that. So my question is related to that, is that did you also have a similar, I know the geographical location and the specificity that you discussed is completely different. It is a major crop, and you've also shared the cropping cycle and the major crops of this region, and paddy being one of the major crops. But for me, in my research, what I saw is that they were not just dependent on paddy, because that was the only way that they were also adapting to the uncertainties. So they were already into a multi-cropping system, you know. So that was, I felt, was one of their coping mechanisms. So how crop diversification, because yours is also an agrarian community, you spoke about different livelihood diversification as also a method to adapt to the uncertainties. How crop diversification or whether crop diversification has been, because the introduction of paddy is the fallout of the green revolution, right? So
Exactly.
but whether the community was earlier practicing any form of diversification when it comes to crops. Yeah, that was one.
So here there is not a it is so so from my understanding the region has been growing paddy for thousands of years, like 2000 year old history is there of paddy cultivation. So now that they are moving from two cropping seasons to three cropping season based because now they have access to groundwater. Earlier they would just do one maybe if the water was limited. So like how you said that there is this difference in elevation here also. So this is the canal. So there will be the land which is on the upper end, like slightly elevated, would be slightly drier. So this is where the groundwater or the borewells were dug first, so that they could be used for growing paddy in multiple seasons instead of one, where maybe they were largely dependent on rainfall. Because earlier the cropping cycle was traditionally developed in such a way that it would be supported by the natural drainage and also the monsoon. What because the region receives rainfall in two seasons, both southwest and northeast. So the cropping seasons were adjusted in such a way that the water would be available during sowing of the first season, and just as the harvest of the first is done, and second the sowing starts, the next monsoon starts. So it was adjusted, but now with the changing climatic conditions, they cannot rely so much on the monsoon. Um, but it is largely paddy. So the first two, so if you divide the year into three parts, the first two parts, it is just paddy that they grow. It is in the summer season that they can choose to grow this pulses or cotton. And I think the soil condition there, which is like more of clay, only uh, is suitable for paddy cultivation. That could also be the reason. I have not seen them growing some other crops. So one of the villages that we interviewed recently for my this postdoctoral work, there they said that they had shifted to sugarcane for a few years because there was a sugar mill that had come in. But then they shifted to paddy again because they say paddy is lazy man's crop. So it is easier to cultivate paddy compared to sugar and sugarcane. So that is one of the observations that I had from the region. And in terms of diversification, I think livelihood diversification is only in terms of the activities, the income generating activities, like they're moving away from agriculture and not so much in crop diversification. But within paddy, the different varieties that they grow, if you also call that diversification, then that has changed because it is then catering to the market demand. So there is this locally there is this procurement center that is set up by the government after each harvest season during the harvest time. And they take up certain varieties of paddy, but there are different varieties of paddy which are short grains, for example, which is in demand by the private traders who then to whom it is easier to sell the harvest and maybe slightly better payment also they give um, for their produce. So the crop choice then is altered. Not the crop is not changed, but the variety of paddy is then altered to suit the demand of the market. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the next observation would be is around the idea of the state and the state's interventions, because although you mentioned a couple of them, and I know there was time restriction, so it was not possible to elaborate a lot. But I think you've also interviewed people from the government,
Hmm.
in the sense the local
Authority.
government bodies. Yeah,
Hmm.
you've interviewed them, right? So, have you tried to also see then what is, for instance, since there are these differences with respect to the class, which is because of the landholding patterns also that you mentioned about the three major classes of
Hmm.
farmers. So, did you find that with respect to differences in interests or plurality of knowledge, differences in power, did you find that because definitely the community is not a homogeneous group, and there were differences with respect to knowledge, interests, and power. But have you found that how this kind of works out when it comes to the interactions between the community and the state, in the sense that who gets access to the groundwater, who doesn't get access, or who is able to, you know, get other benefits. So it could be, sorry, maybe there's an internet instability. So who gets benefits with respect to states programs, new programs or new subsidy schemes that is coming out? Who gets some of the benefits or who is not able to get the benefits? Have you seen these differences?
Yeah, so these differences do exist, but in the case of groundwater, it is just that who owns the land and has the capital to drill the borewell there, it just does it. Unless, in case they want some sort of subsidy from the department, it is then that they follow the rules that are there, that is the distance between two borewells or distance from the canal or distance from a tank, irrigation tank. Otherwise, they would just, based on what the dowser, the diviner tells them that this is the location where the borewell has to be drilled. They'll just drill it based on how much capital they are able to procure or acquire. But in for other subsidies and interventions, it is either the progressive farmers or large farmers who are in touch with the extension services officers. The others don't even know their existence in some cases. And and for others, they know, like for example, seeds are available for on subsidy or fertilizers are available on subsidy, but it is far away, and it isn't like an expense to reach that place to procure those things. So they might as well go to the nearest shop and just buy it from on maybe on credit, and then just pay it back later because and these shopkeepers also are like money lenders for them, and they would give them some money in advance. So it is like a other form of relation that they have there. And I think largely then it is only the even the agricultural officers and extension officers. So one of the person that we interviewed also, he said that I am in touch with so many farmers in the village. So it would be just 10 out of maybe 500 farmers. And those 10 farmers would publicize it as if this person is doing a good job, but it is not the case. There is disparity in access to knowledge there. Hmm.
Yeah, correct. So something similar that I found in my field as well. Um, Closeness to extension officers and closeness to different government bodies or people. coming to their villages also meant that there were better access to knowledge as well as better access to different kind of subsidies and different other programs.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it is that those who require it the most are not even aware of it. Yes, yeah.
And also I found a lot of this disparity with the respect to the gender line. So it is not just having the money and
Mhm.
the land to be able to drill for the groundwater, but it was also about I found a lot of gender differences. Even if they have the land, they were not always, uh, I mean, not necessarily they will always have the capital, but they might have the land, not the capital, but still they will not be able to receive the subsidies or the information in the right time. So in that ways, they were more vulnerable
Yeah.
in that sense. So I
Yeah.
found that, yeah.
So in my study area and also in the other villages that I have interviewed, we have encountered very few women farmers. Somehow it is, and even if there are women who are actively taking decisions on farm, they always have like on call husband on call who is guiding them. So they would consider the partner, the husband who has out migrated and not even present to take these decisions to be the household head and the decision making authority. So that difference there, I think from there it starts, and then they have difficulties in the negotiations that they have to undertake on a daily basis with the laborers, with the government officials, and other different processes that they have to follow.
Yeah, so that's it from my side. And
Okay.
it was a great discussion. I really thoroughly enjoyed. And I hope you can continue doing this work. So you are already continuing your research. I mean,
Yes,
this
yeah.
is part of your doctoral,
Postdoctoral, yeah.
yeah, you're doing your postdoc, but you're continuing your research area
Yeah, it is in the
mostly.
same area, but it is more focused on the water governance aspects now than the
Mm,
livelihoods. But then everything is connected to
mm.
water. So then
Yes,
livelihoods do come out, the dynamics there.
correct.
Mm.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so we
Yeah.
sort
Thank
of
you.
end this session here. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Kalyani, and all the best with your research as well.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.